Jai Hind, ladies and gentlemen. Aviation Safety India is delighted to extend a very warm welcome to each one of you for joining us for this very interesting and educative video presentation on aeronautical decision making. Aeronautical decision making is a very important part of crew resource management training, and all the operators and pilots should be fully knowledgeable about the various aspects of aeronautical decision making. Majority of the accidents in India and abroad have occurred due to poor decision making, including the crash at Mangalore and Kozhikode. Hence, it is essential that the training related to aeronautical decision making is taken seriously by all the pilots and operators. Let's now proceed to the video presentation. First, let's discuss what is aeronautical decision making. Aeronautical decision making, ADM for short, is a systematic approach to the mental process used by pilots to consistently determine the best course of action in response to a given set of circumstances. In any given situation, a pilot has a number of options from which he is required to select the most appropriate option after having evaluated the options intelligently. Even after the decision has been made, the pilot must review and confirm whether the selected option is giving the desired outcome. If not, then the pilot should consider modifying the decision. Now we shall have a look at various models of decision making. First is the 3P model. Now making a risk assessment is important, but in order to make any assessment, the pilot must be able to see and sense surrounding and process what is seen before performing a corrective action. An excellent process to use in this scenario is called the 3Ps, that is, perceive, process, and perform. First, the pilots must perceive the set of circumstances of the flight, then process by evaluating the impact on flight safety, and then perform by implementing the best course of action. The perceive, process, and perform, that is 3P model for aeronautical decision making, offers a simple, practical, and systematic approach that can be used during all phases of the flight. Next, we'll discuss shell model. The shell model places emphasis on the human being and human interface with other components of the aviation system. First letter of the shell is S. S stands for software. Software includes rules, instructions, aviation regulations, policy, norms, laws, orders, safety procedures, standard operating procedures, custom practices, conventions, habits, symbology, supervisor, command, and computer programs, etc. S stands for hardware, that is physical elements of the aviation system, such as the aircraft, associated equipment, tools, material, and computers, etc. E stands for environment, the situation in which the liveware, hardware, software system must function, that is the natural environment. Liveware, the human component is the pilot, maintenance personnel, air traffic controller, etc. And it includes knowledge, attitudes, and skills. We have another L, that is liveware 2. A second liveware is an interaction between the human elements, the pilot with the other pilots, ATC, operations, ground, and maintenance personnel, etc. Please remember the liveware constitutes the hub of the model and the most critical as well as the most flexible component in the system. Adverse mental state of the pilots may contribute to poor decision making. Pilots' behavior and motivation also affect decision making. Next, we'll discuss the DECIDE model. The DECIDE model is another tool used to identify and mitigate risk. It is a six-step process that begins with realizing that there is an issue. First letter of the DECIDE is D. D is for detect. Detect that there is a problem. E is estimate. Estimate the risks involved and the need to react to the problem. C is choose. Choose a proper course of action. I is for identify. Identify what you can do to control the situation. And next is D. D is for do. Do what is necessary to correct the problem. And E is for to evaluate. Evaluate if your actions were effective. Now we shall discuss risk management decision-making process. Risk management is a systematic decision-making process used to identify and manage hazards that endanger resources. Risk management is a tool used to make informed decisions by providing the best baseline of knowledge and experience available. The goal of risk management is to identify safety-related hazards and mitigate the associated risks proactively. There are four principles of risk management. First is pilots should not accept unnecessary risk. Also, please remember flying is not possible without risk, but the unnecessary risk comes without a corresponding return. Accept risk when benefits outweigh dangers or costs. Integrate risk management into planning at all levels. Because risk is an unavoidable part of every flight, safety requires the use of appropriate and effective risk management, not just in the pre-flight planning stage, but in all stages of the flight. Now, during each flight, decisions must be made regarding events involving interactions between the four risk elements. These risk elements are the pilot in command, the airplane, the environment, and the operation. Now, based on the input from pilot, airplane, environment, and operation, we get the view of overall situation. One of the most important decisions that a pilot in command must make is the go/no-go decision. This is a critical decision, and pilots should not take a decision based on their instinct, intuition, or hunch. Go/no-go decision should be taken only after evaluating various factors which have a bearing on the safe conduct of the flight. Now, related to pilot, a pilot must continually make decisions about his competency, condition of health, mental and emotional state, level of fatigue, and there are many other variables. Aeroplane. Before a pilot flies an aeroplane, he or she should ensure that it is fully serviceable, that is fully airworthy. Pilot should never fly an aircraft or helicopter with even minor snag, because seemingly minor snag on ground can become major snag in the air. Therefore, the pilots must get the snag investigated, rectified, even if it involves delay. Of course, there will be many pressures on you to ignore the minor snag and go ahead with the flight, but please make sure that you get the snag investigated and rectified before you take off. Monitoring the behavior of an aircraft or helicopter is very important. Like our body, which gives us advance warning about any likely illness, similarly the aircraft or helicopter also gives us advance warning. Maybe some kind of unusual sound, or maybe some change in parameters, or something similar. So pilots must not ignore the changes in the aircraft behavior and must be very careful about attending to these. Pilots should never fly an aircraft or helicopter beyond its laid down parameters. If you exceed the limitation, you will stress the aircraft, fatigue the aircraft, which over a period of time will become a serious safety risk. Next, we'll talk about environment. First is the weather. Please remember, weather is one element that can change drastically over time and distance. Therefore, you must continue to remain updated and monitor the weather continuously. Then air traffic control, navigate, terrain, takeoff and landing areas, and surrounding obstacles are part of the environment. Operations. A pilot is flying a machine in an environment for the purpose of some operation. Before undertaking operations, the pilot must evaluate all the risk factors related to self, airplane oblique helicopter and environment, that is weather and terrain, etc. and then only take off. Pilot must carry out their self-assessment because performance during a flight is affected by many factors such as health, decency of experience, knowledge, skill level, and attitude. Now we'll discuss some of the hazardous attitudes to decision making and flying. Studies have identified 5 hazardous attitudes that can interfere with the ability of the pilots to make sound decisions and exercise authority properly. First hazardous attitude is anti-authority, that is, don't tell me what to do. Pilots with this attitude do not believe in rules, regulations, and SOPs, etc., and as such, they do not respect authority. Such pilots are serious risk to safety. Next hazardous attitude is impulsivity, that is, do it quickly. Pilots are advised not to act on impulse. They should always check, recheck, and double check before operating any levers, buttons, and switches. There have been incidents, oblique accidents, wherein the pilots on impulse switched off the live engine instead of the dead engine. Next hazardous attitude is invulnerability. Most of the pilots think that accidents happen only to others and will not happen to them. They should remember that accidents can happen to anyone at any time and no one is invulnerable. So they should always be prepared to handle emergency situations. Macho attitude is the next hazardous attitude. So many pilots have gone into the ground since they are trying to show off and impress others. Macho attitude has no place in aviation. Last hazardous attitude is resignation. Sometimes pilots resign to their fate. Please remember, it is essential that the pilot do not resign to fate and feel helpless. Pilots must remember that they can make a difference and can control the situation. Pilots also need to be more assertive when the situation demands. It is essential that the pilot examine their decision carefully to ensure that the decision has not been influenced by a hazardous attitude. If the decision is being influenced by one of the hazardous attitude, the pilot must not take that decision. Now we'll discuss stress management. Everyone is stressed to some degree almost all the time. A certain amount of stress is good since it keeps a person alert and prevents complacency. However, the effects of stress are cumulative and if not coped with adequately, they eventually add up to an intolerable burden. Performance generally increases with the onset of stress, peaks, and then begins to fall off rapidly as stress levels exceed a person's ability to cope. The ability to make effective decisions during flight can be impaired by stress. Factors referred to as stressors can increase a pilot's risk of error in the cockpit. Now we shall discuss various stresses. First one is physical stress. Conditions associated with the environment such as temperature and humidity extremes, noise, vibration and lack of oxygen. Physiological stress. Physical conditions such as fatigue, lack of physical fitness, sleep loss, missed meals leading to low blood sugar levels and illness. Psychological stress. Social or emotional factors such as death in the family, a divorce, a sick child, job-related problems, financial problems, litigation, etc. Now, how do you manage stress? First of all, the pilots must include some relaxation time in a busy schedule. They should maintain a program of physical fitness which can help reduce stress levels. Learning to manage time more effectively can help avoid heavy pressures imposed by getting behind schedule and not meeting deadlines. Pilots should take a self-assessment to determine their own capabilities and limitations and then set realistic goals. And they should avoid stressful situations and encounters. How they can avoid stressful situations? By planning, preparing, and briefing before they undertake the flight. Next important thing in stress management is use of resources. First of all, pilots should know what resources are available to them in the cockpit, cabin, and outside the aircraft. Next important requirement is to have knowledge about how to use the resources. If you don't have knowledge about a resource, it is no use of having it on board. Next, we'll discuss workload management. Now, to manage workload, items should be prioritized. Pilots must remember that during any situation, especially in an emergency, they should remember the golden rule in aviation. That is, aviate, that is, while flying, controlling the aircraft or the helicopter should be the first priority of the pilot. Then next is navigate. The second priority should be to navigate. Third is communicate. The third priority should be to communicate with ATC, etc. And fourth priority is manage. That is to manage your aircraft or helicopter and system like autopilot and flight management system, etc. When the pilots get overloaded and are handling a number of activities at the same time, they may get fixated on one instrument or activity and overlook others. Allow me to tell you how the pilots can lose situational awareness, become spatially disorientated, and lose control of the aircraft or the helicopter. A pilot flying on instruments is maintaining control of the aircraft or the helicopter with reference to the instruments, sees his height changing and VSI altimeter going up and down. The pilot manipulates controls to get back to the correct height and in the process gets fixated on VSI altimeter and overlooks HSI, arterial horizon, TSI, DI, compass and ASI. Due to the fixation of the pilot on VSI and altimeter, the pilot does not notice a change in the angle of bank, change in direction and speed, and may lose control of the aircraft or helicopter. Hence, it is essential that the pilots are aware that they can get fixated on one instrument and may overlook the indications of the other instruments. Scanning the instruments by the pilots and alertness of the co-pilot to correct his captain if he is getting fixated can avoid loss of control of the aircraft or helicopter. Now, how to manage workload? When the pilots are becoming overloaded with work, they should stop, think, slow down, and prioritize. Understand options delegate tasks, and autopilot, if available, may be used. ATC may be enlisted to provide assistance. Now we shall have a look at the margin of safety. From this graph, you can see that the margin of safety is minimum during approach and landing phase. So you must be very vigilant, alert, and fully involved during approach and landing, because the margin of safety during approach and landing is minimum. Now next we'll discuss situational awareness. Now what is situational awareness for a pilot? Now what is happening inside the cockpit, oblique cabin and cabin? What terrain are you flying over? What is the weather? What is the attitude of your aircraft or helicopter related to the runway, helipad, obstruction and terrain? What is your minimum en route altitude, minimum off route altitude, minimum safe or sector altitude, and minimum descent altitude? And they should have all other flight related knowledge and general aviation related knowledge. How can you improve the situational awareness? For better situational awareness, you must carry out good planning, good preparation, good briefing. Pilots should have good knowledge about their aircraft, oblique helicopter, its systems, procedures, emergency actions, all aspects related to flight and general aviation related knowledge. They should be alert and vigilant, particularly during critical phases of the flight like takeoff, landing, and flying during bad weather and if there's an emergency on board. Pilots should never be complacent. Then we shall have a look at the obstacle to maintaining situational awareness. First one is the complacency. Most of the pilots become complacent and overconfident after they gain experience, and also when they carry out the same task repeatedly. Chances of such pilots losing situational awareness are quite high. Fatigue, stress, and work overload can cause a pilot to fixate on a single perceived important item, thus reducing an overall situational awareness. Distraction, which can divert the pilot's attention from monitoring the instruments or scanning outside the aircraft, has been a contributing factor in many accidents. Many flight deck distractions begin as a minor problem, such as a gaze that is not reading correctly, but results in accidents as the pilot diverts attention to the perceived problem and neglects proper control of the aircraft. Here I would like to narrate the occurrence of a serious accident. Boeing 747 on final approach, Los Angeles Airport, good runway, good weather, good aircraft, and very experienced pilots. Captain 20,000 hours, co-pilot 18,000 hours, flight engineer 15,000 hours of experience. Thus, total cockpit experience 53,000 hours. On the final approach, the pilots lower the landing gear for landing and notices that the nose wheel green light is not visible. The pilot starts checking various switches, etc. And during this process, to address the nose wheel light issue, the pilot is joined by co-pilot and flight engineer who also are trying to help the pilot in finding some solution. In the process, all the three crew members are busy attending to the nose wheel light issue and overlook the approach path of the aircraft. The aircraft was descending on final approach and crashed short of the runway, killing all on board. Can you imagine how the crew members with 53,000 hours of cockpit experience forgot the golden rule in aviation? The accident happened because all the crew members were fixated on the nose wheel light and no one was flying or monitoring the approach path of the aircraft. They forgot the golden rule in aviation, that is aviate, navigate, communicate, and manage. Pilots must remember the golden rule in aviation and not get fixated and distracted. One pilot should always be flying and monitoring the aircraft or the helicopter, notwithstanding any problem or distraction. Now we shall discuss some of the operational pitfalls. First one is the peer pressure. Poor decision making may be based upon an emotional response to peers rather than evaluating a situation objectively. Peer pressure has led to a number of accidents. Next is the mindset. A pilot displays mindset to an inability to recognize and cope with the changes in a given situation. Get there-itis oblique get home-itis. Keenness to reach destination or home at any cost, regardless of adverse conditions and meeting with accidents. Duck hunter syndrome, tendency to descend below the safe altitude with the mistaken belief that there may be a safety margin. Scud running, descending below clouds to remain in contact with ground and consequently descending below safe altitude. Continuing visual flight rule into instrument conditions. Mixing VFR and IFR, that is flying on instruments and also looking outside at the same time, has led to spatial disorientation and serious accidents. Descent below the minimum en route altitude. Maybe either the pilot is not aware of the minimum en route altitude or descends thinking that there must be an inbuilt safety margin. Flying outside the envelope, exceeding the limitation of the aircraft or helicopter, or violating the brief or standard flight profile. This can lead to serious compromise on safety. Operating without adequate fuel reserves may be due to lack of proper flight planning, disregarding applicable regulations, or confidence and not catering for contingencies. Pilots must remember that fuel is life and they should always carry adequate fuel to cater to the contingencies. Neglect of flight planning, preparation, inspection, and checklist. Experienced pilots particularly tend to ignore these important aspects of flying and get into accident situations. Hence, it is essential that the pilots take flight planning, preparation, and inspection seriously and follow the checklist meticulously. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, when a pilot follows good decision-making practices, the inherent risk in a flight is reduced or even eliminated. The ability to make good decisions is based upon direct or indirect experience and education. Hence, the pilots should continue to enhance their knowledge and skills, and they should take all aviation-related training seriously. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for taking interest in watching this important video presentation on aeronautical decision making. The knowledge and awareness related to aeronautical decision making can go a long way in enhancing the standards of decision making by the pilots. Hope you found this video presentation useful and interesting. Wishing you all a very happy and safe flying and many happy landings. Jai Hind.